No one believed me when I said I could hear breathing from the walls. But I know what I heard. It wasn't the pipes, it wasn't my imagination, it was alive. The apartment seemed perfect at first, like it had been waiting for me. Nestled in a quiet, forgotten corner of Salem, Massachusetts, its price was almost suspiciously low. The landlord handed me the keys with an urgency I didn't question then, but wish I had. He muttered something about tenants not sticking around long as he turned to leave, his footsteps fading faster than they should have. Inside, the apartment felt like stepping into a memory. The walls bore the ghostly outlines of old wallpaper, faded flowers trapped beneath layers of cheap paint. The air was heavy with a scent I couldn't place. Something damp, metallic, almost like soil after a storm. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and the cold seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The first night was uneventful, but the second, that was when I heard it. It began as a faint rhythm, like someone struggling to breathe, just beyond the plaster. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming at me to move, but I couldn't. The sound grew louder, more deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was in there wanted me to hear. I pressed my ear to the wall, my breath hitching. The moment I did, the sound stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. It felt watchful, coiled, like something waiting for me to turn away. When I finally did, the sound returned, louder this time. The room turned cold, bone-chilling cold. My breath fogged the air and my heart pounded so hard it hurt. And then, just as I reached for my phone to record the noise, I heard it. A whisper, soft and slow, but unmistakable. It said my name. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the whisper echoed in my head. My name, soft, drawn out, like it was savoring the sound. I told myself it was just exhaustion, maybe stress from moving, but the lie felt thin. The next morning, the room seemed different. Brighter, maybe, as if the sun was trying to pierce through the apartment's perpetual gloom. But the air still held that metallic tang, stronger now, like rusted iron clinging to the back of my throat. I tried to distract myself with normalcy, organizing my books, fixing up the kitchen, unpacking old photos, but the sense of being watched never left. Each creak of the floorboards felt deliberate, like unseen footsteps pacing just out of sight. The whisper didn't return until dusk. I was sitting at my desk, the room illuminated by the soft glow of a desk lamp, when I heard it again. This time it wasn't my name. It was humming. Low, tuneless, almost childlike. I froze, the pen in my hand hovering over a notebook. The sound wasn't just behind the wall now. It was moving, trailing along the room as though circling me. My eyes darted to the shadows stretching across the room. They flickered unnaturally, warping in ways they shouldn't. Hello? My voice broke as I called out, hating myself for the instinct. The humming stopped, and then a knock. It came from inside the wall, loud and deliberate. 3 sharp raps, as if demanding to be let out. I stumbled back, tripping over the chair. My breathing was ragged, each gasp louder than I wanted it to be. Desperate, I banged on the wall. "Who's there? What do you want?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then a sound that sent ice coursing through my veins. Laughter. Faint and distant, but unmistakable. I grabbed my phone, shaking as I dialed the landlord. When he answered, I tried to keep my voice steady. "There's something in the walls. I don't know what it is, but it's not normal." He sighed, long and heavy. "Look, kid, it's an old building. You'll hear things. Just ignore it." Before I could argue, the line went dead. The whispers didn't care. They returned that night, louder and closer, filling the room until they felt like they were inside my head. By the third night, I'd reached the edge of reason. The whispers had grown relentless, blending into a symphony of voices, each more insistent than the last. They didn't just call my name anymore. They spoke fragments of sentences, cryptic and chilling. Words like help and stay interwove with sobs and gasps, creating a chorus of despair that clung to the darkness. I tried everything: earplugs, music blasting through headphones, sleeping pills, but nothing could drown them out. They weren't just in the walls anymore. They were in me. That night, as I sat curled on the couch with every light on, I noticed something strange. The wallpaper, sections of it, were peeling, curling at the edges as though something was pushing against it from the other side. My chest tightened as I approached, the air thick and suffocating. I reached out hesitantly, running a finger along the loose edge. It felt damp, the texture wrong, almost organic. Before I could think better of it, I pulled. The wallpaper came away in a long strip, revealing a series of jagged scratches beneath. They weren't random, they formed symbols, twisting, angular shapes etched deep into the plaster, radiating malice. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat as I realized they weren't just scratches, they were words. We are here. The room grew colder, the temperature plummeting so rapidly I could see my breath fogging the air. My phone, sitting on the coffee table, buzzed violently, the screen flickering. I snatched it up, hoping for a distraction, but the notification chilled me to my core. It was a message, from my own number. Don't turn around. My blood froze. The air behind me felt alive, humming with energy. My muscles locked, terror rooting me in place. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at me to run, I turned. The room was empty, but the shadows weren't. They coiled in the far corner, darker than the absence of light should allow. They moved unnaturally, writhing and folding into shapes that defied logic. And at their center, two pinpricks of white gleamed like eyes, cold, empty, and fixed directly on me. The buzzing grew louder, filling my ears with static as the shadows surged forward. I screamed, stumbling backward until I hit the wall. My hand found the scratches, the coldness of the grooves searing my skin like frostbite. "Get out!" I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. The shadows halted, quivering as though undecided. Then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, they melted back into the corners, leaving the room deathly still. I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent the rest of the night researching the building's history, combing through old archives and forums. What I found left me trembling. 5 tenants had lived in this apartment before me. None stayed longer than 6 months. 2 disappeared entirely, their belongings left behind. And one left a message carved into the wood of the doorframe before vanishing. It wants you to stay. The 4th night, I decided I couldn't stay another second. I packed hastily, throwing clothes and books into a duffel bag, my hands trembling so badly I could barely zip it shut. The whispers were louder than ever, forming a chaotic cacophony that seemed to come from every direction. The air was electric, vibrating with an unseen force. As I reached for the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. The lights flickered wildly, then died, plunging the room into darkness. My phone's flashlight became my only lifeline as I stumbled back, panic clawing at my chest. "Let me out!" I shouted, yanking at the door handle. It didn't budge. Then, the laughter began again. Deep, guttural, and cruel, it filled the apartment, echoing off the walls. My flashlight flickered, the beam catching movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. The walls weren't walls anymore. They were writhing, bulging inward as if something massive and alive was pushing against them. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, revealing glimpses of something dark and wet beneath. Fingers thin, pale, and impossibly long slid through the cracks, clawing at the edges as though trying to tear their way through. I screamed, backing away until I hit the opposite wall. My breath came in short, frantic gasps as the thing inside the walls began to push harder, the cracks widening with every heave. The symbols. The scratches I'd uncovered. They were glowing now, pulsing with a sickly yellow light. My flashlight flickered, its beam bouncing wildly as I looked for anything to defend myself. My eyes landed on a canister of lighter fluid I'd left near the kitchen, a remnant from a failed attempt at assembling a grill. Desperation overrode fear. I grabbed the canister and doused the walls, the stench of chemicals filling the air. My shaking hands fumbled for a match, and when I struck it, the flame was the only thing that felt real. "For them or for me," I muttered, my voice cracking. I tossed the match. The fire roared to life, devouring the wallpaper and racing along the cracks. The thing inside the walls screamed, a sound so inhuman and deafening it nearly brought me to my knees. Smoke filled the room, choking me as I stumbled toward the door. This time it opened, as though the fire had broken the curse. I didn't look back. The night I left the apartment, I didn't stop running until I was blocks away, coughing violently from the smoke still clinging to my lungs. Flames licked at the sky behind me, a sickly orange glow against the black December night. The sirens came minutes later, their wails cutting through the silence that had settled over me like a shroud. I stood there, clutching my duffel bag, watching as the fire consumed the building. Somewhere deep inside, I almost felt relieved. Maybe the fire would destroy whatever had been trapped in those walls. Maybe it was over. But even as I thought that, I knew better. I stayed with a friend that night, crashing on their couch. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words fee. The first snowfall came early that year. It was the same night the shadow appeared. The cabin in Vermont was supposed to be a fresh start for me and my daughter Ellie. After the divorce, I needed space to breathe, to think, to figure out how to be a dad again. The small, secluded cabin nestled in the woods seemed perfect. Too perfect, maybe. The first few days were uneventful, almost peaceful. Ellie loved the snow, spending hours building forts and leaving tiny boot prints all over the yard. At night, we'd sit by the fireplace, her laughter echoing against the cabin's wooden walls. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe things were going to be okay. Then came the snowstorm. It swept in without warning, thick flakes blotting out the world beyond our windows. The wind howled through the trees like a wounded animal, rattling the shutters and making the cabin groan. Ellie pressed her face to the frosted glass, her breath fogging it up. "That's not ours," she said suddenly. I looked up from the fireplace, my chest tightening at her tone. "What's not ours, kiddo?" She pointed outside, the footprints. My stomach dropped. Sure enough, leading from the tree line to the edge of the yard was a set of tracks. Large, uneven. They didn't belong to Ellie or me, and worse, they didn't lead back to the trees. I tried to keep calm. It's probably just a deer or something. Ellie frowned but didn't argue. She stared out the window for a long time, silent. That night, she woke me up with a whisper. "Daddy," she said, her voice trembling. "He's out there, watching." That night, I didn't sleep much. Ellie's words echoed in my head. "He's out there, watching." I told myself it was just her imagination. Kids get spooked easily, right? But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those footprints in the snow, perfectly spaced. Too large to belong to an animal, too uneven to be human. And the way they stopped just shy of the cabin, as if whoever made them wanted to stay hidden. The storm raged on the next day. Snow piled high against the cabin, trapping us in a cocoon of white. Ellie played quietly with her dolls, but she kept glancing toward the window. I tried to distract her with games, books, anything, but she was distant, withdrawn. By late afternoon, the power flickered out. I groaned, fumbling for the flashlight I'd stashed in the kitchen drawer. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the cabin and the wind outside. Ellie sat cross-legged on the floor, her back to me. "Ellie?" I called. She didn't respond. I moved closer, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the dim room. She was staring at something in her hands, a snow globe we'd bought on the drive-up. Inside, the little figurine of a man stood frozen in a tiny winter landscape. "He's here," Ellie whispered, not looking up. My heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" She finally turned to me, her eyes wide, glistening with tears. "The man in the snow, he's here." I froze, my pulse thundering in my ears. "Ellie, there's no man. You're just..." Before I could finish, there was a knock at the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I stood there, paralyzed, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Who would be out here in this storm? I glanced at the window, but the snow was so thick I couldn't see a thing. "Stay here," I told Ellie, my voice trembling. I crept toward the door, my boots crunching on the wooden floor. My hand hovered over the latch as I forced myself to breathe. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I yanked the door open, flashlight raised, and there was nothing, just the swirling snow. But as I stepped outside, my light caught something in the snow at my feet. Another set of footprints, fresh ones, and this time they led right to the window. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the storm. The fresh footprints by the window were burned into my mind, each step pressed deep into the snow. Someone or something had been standing there, staring in. Ellie was watching me from the middle of the room, clutching the snow globe to her chest. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. "What did you see?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She shook her head quickly, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's him, Daddy, the Shadow Man. He's mad." "Ellie, stop!" I snapped, harsher than I intended. The words left my mouth before I could think. Her face crumpled, and I immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, kiddo. I need you to tell me what you mean." She sniffled, wiping her face with her sleeve. "He doesn't want us here." I felt the floor tilt beneath me, like I was losing my grip on reality. "It's just the storm," I muttered, mostly to myself. "It's making everything seem worse than it is." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. That night, the power stayed out. The fire in the fireplace was our only source of light, and the shadows it cast seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally across the cabin walls. Ellie fell asleep on the couch, clutching her snow globe like a lifeline. I sat in the armchair, gripping the flashlight, my eyes darting to the windows every few seconds. It started around midnight, a low scratching sound, faint at first, like fingernails on glass. My body tensed, every hair on the back of my neck standing up. It was coming from the window behind me. I turned slowly, the beam of my flashlight shaking as I pointed it at the glass. Nothing. Just frost and snow. But the scratching didn't stop. It was louder now, more insistent, like something was trying to claw its way inside. And then I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the glass, its outline barely visible in the swirling snow. Tall and thin, its arms hung unnaturally long at its sides. It had no face, just a blank expanse of shadow where its features should have been. My breath hitched as the figure raised one hand, pressing it flat against the glass. The sound it made was wet and horrible, like flesh dragging over ice. I scrambled back, tripping over the armchair and falling hard onto the floor. The flashlight rolled out of my hand, its beam flickering as it settled on Ellie. She was sitting up now, wide awake, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the door. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's inside." Ellie's words hit me like a punch to the chest. My head whipped toward the door, my heart racing. It was closed, locked. But the air in the cabin felt different, heavier, like we weren't alone anymore. I grabbed the flashlight and scrambled to my feet. The beam swept across the room, the shadows leaping and twisting with the movement. Ellie huddled against the couch, clutching her snow globe, her eyes darting around the room like she was trying to follow something I couldn't see. "Stay there," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the thundering storm outside. I crept toward the door, every creak of the floorboards sending a jolt of fear through my body. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. The feeling in the air, it was suffocating, a cold that went deeper than the winter outside. And then I heard it. A low, guttural growl, coming from behind me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Slowly I turned, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The shadow was there. No longer outside, it loomed in the corner of the room, a towering mass of blackness that seemed to absorb the firelight. Its arms stretched impossibly long, tapering into claw-like hands that scraped against the wooden floor. The air around it shimmered, distorting like heat waves in the dead of winter. It moved. A slow, deliberate step toward Ellie. "No," I shouted, my voice breaking. I lunged toward it, swinging the flashlight wildly, but the beam of light passed through the shadow like it wasn't even there. Ellie screamed as the creature bent toward her, its faceless void mere inches from her. In a panic, I grabbed the poker from the fireplace, its metal end glowing orange from the heat. "Get away from her," I roared, swinging the poker with all my strength. The moment it made contact, the shadow recoiled, a deafening screech filling the cabin. The poker trembled in my hands, the heat fading as the shadow dissolved into the air, leaving nothing but the smell of burning wood and ash. Ellie clung to me, her tiny body trembling. I held her close, my eyes darting around the room. The shadow was gone. For now. The cabin was deathly quiet after the shadow disappeared, save for the faint crackle of the dying fire. I held Ellie close, her trembling body pressed against mine. My mind raced, replaying what had just happened. The thing wasn't gone, not really. I could feel it, lingering in the edges of the darkness. As soon as dawn broke, I packed whatever we could carry and loaded Ellie into the car. The storm had eased, leaving the world blanketed in pristine, untouched snow. Except for the footprints. They were everywhere, circling the cabin, leading to the windows, stopping inches from the car. I didn't stop to think. I slammed the door shut, started the engine, and drove. The tires skidded on the icy road, but I didn't care. I just needed to get us as far away as possible. Ellie was silent the entire ride, clutching her snow globe with white-knuckled hands. She didn't ask where we were going, and I didn't tell her. I didn't know. We ended up in a motel 2 towns over. The place was run down, reeking of stale cigarettes, but it felt safe, or as safe as anywhere could feel. Ellie fell asleep almost immediately, curled up on the bed like nothing had happened. But I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring out at the empty parking lot, waiting. For hours there was nothing but the hum of the heater and the occasional rustle of wind, and then I saw it. A shadow. Far off, barely visible under the flickering motel sign. It didn't move, but it didn't need to. I knew it was watching. Even now, as I write this, I feel I never should have touched the keys. They weren't meant for me. It started the day I bought the desk, an old battered thing from a thrift shop near the French Quarter in New Orleans. The wood was cracked, the varnish peeling, but it had character, and for a broke college student, the price was right. The man behind the counter seemed eager to get rid of it. "You want it, kid? $20 and it's yours." $20, I didn't question it. When I got it home and set it up in my dorm room, I noticed the hidden drawer. Tucked beneath the main compartment, it was nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Curious, I tugged it open. Inside was a ring of keys. They were unlike any I'd seen before. Old, tarnished, and oddly heavy, each key was unique, some with ornate engravings, others with strange shapes that didn't seem to fit any lock I could imagine. They were warm to the touch, almost like they'd been sitting in sunlight. At first I thought they were just some weird antique collection left behind by the previous owner. But as I turned them over in my hands, I felt it. A faint hum, like a low vibration that crawled up my arm. I put the keys back in the drawer and tried to forget about them. But that night, the dreams started. They weren't dreams, not really. They felt too real. Locked doors stretching endlessly in a black void. Whispers, faint and urgent, coming from the other side. A sense of being watched, of being weighed. When I woke up, the keys were no longer in the drawer. They were on my desk. I stared at the keys on my desk, trying to convince myself I'd forgotten putting them there. But I knew I hadn't. The ring sat in the center of the desk, glinting faintly in the morning light, as though mocking me. I reached out hesitantly, my hand hovering over them. They felt wrong, as though they were watching me, waiting. "Pull yourself together," I muttered, grabbing them and shoving them back into the hidden drawer. But they wouldn't stay hidden. By the second night, they had moved again, this time to my bedside table. I woke up to find the largest key resting inches from my phone, its cold surface gleaming unnaturally despite the dim light of my dorm. That day, I decided to get rid of them. I wrapped the ring in an old towel and tossed it into a dumpster behind the cafeteria. It should have been over, but when I got back to my room, the keys were there, sitting on the desk like they'd never left. The hum was louder now, more insistent. I couldn't ignore it anymore. There was a pull to them, a whispering in my mind that I couldn't quite make out. One key in particular caught my attention. It was smaller than the others with a jagged edge and a faint engraving I couldn't decipher. When I held it, the hum grew stronger, and I felt the air around me shift, like a current brushing against my skin. I knew it wasn't a coincidence when it worked. The key led me to a door in the abandoned wing of the campus, a place everyone avoided. Rusted locks and faded "Do Not Enter" signs lined the hallways, but the key seemed to pull me toward one specific door. The wood was warped, and the paint peeled in long strips, exposing the grain beneath. My hands shook as I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly, clicking with a sound that felt too loud in the silence. When the door swung open, I knew immediately I'd made a mistake. The room beyond wasn't a room at all. It was a void, dark, cold, and endless. My breath fogged in the freezing air as I stepped closer, the hum of the keys now a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then the whispers started. The whispers came from the void, faint and overlapping, like 100 voices speaking at once. They weren't clear, just fragments of words, pleading, warning, accusing. My stomach churned as I stepped closer, the air thick and oppressive, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to turn back, to slam the door shut and forget this ever happened. But the pull of the keys was overwhelming, like invisible threads were dragging me forward. The edge of the doorway felt like stepping into a different world. The moment I crossed it, the temperature dropped so sharply it burned my skin. The light from the hallway behind me seemed to vanish, swallowed by the darkness. "Hello," I called out. my voice shaky and small. The whispers stopped. In the sudden silence, I became painfully aware of my heartbeat, pounding loud and fast in my chest. Then, from somewhere deep within the void, came a sound that made my blood freeze. A click. It was soft but unmistakable, like the sound of a key turning in a lock. I spun around, desperate to leave, but the door was gone. The frame that had been behind me now opened into the same endless blackness. Panic surged through me as I ran forward, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The ground beneath my feet wasn't solid. It felt spongy, like walking on layers of ash. The hum of the keys in my pocket grew louder with every step, a vibration that rattled my teeth. Then I saw them. Doors. They stretched endlessly in every direction, floating in the void like islands in a dark sea. Some were pristine, with polished brass handles and elegant carvings. Others were warped and broken, their wood splintered and rotting. Each one seemed to exude its own energy, some inviting, others repelling. As I approached the nearest door, the keys in my pocket vibrated violently, as though trying to leap out. My hand trembled as I pulled the ring free, the largest key glowing faintly in the dark. "Choose," a voice whispered, so close it felt like someone was breathing against my ear. I whipped around, but no one was there. The doors creaked softly, as if beckoning. My head throbbed as the whispers returned, louder now, their words overlapping in a frantic cacophony. One phrase broke through the noise, chilling me to my core. "It's watching." A shadow moved across the void. It wasn't human. It wasn't even fully formed. A mass of darkness with shifting limbs and glowing slits where its eyes should be. The hum of the keys stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. The shadow surged toward me, impossibly fast. I barely had time to shove the glowing key into the nearest door before it reached me. The lock clicked, and the door swung open, pulling me inside with a force that knocked the air from my lungs. I fell, the void swallowing me whole. When I hit the ground, the air was forced from my lungs, leaving me gasping. The world around me was no longer the void, but something worse. The sky was dark, bruised with streaks of red and black, and the ground beneath me felt rough, like cracked stone coated with ash. The air was thick with a metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. In the distance, jagged towers loomed, their silhouettes twisting unnaturally as if caught in a slow-motion collapse. And then I saw them. Figures, hundreds of them, shuffling aimlessly. They were pale, translucent, and broken in ways that defied anatomy. Some dragged twisted limbs, while others hovered inches above the ground. Their faces were hollow, eyes sunken, and mouths gaping in silent screams. The hum of the keys returned, softer now, but still present, a constant vibration in my pocket. One of the figures stopped and turned toward me, its head tilting unnaturally far to one side. "You shouldn't be here," it rasped, its voice like wind through dead leaves. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the keyring. "I didn't mean to come here," I shouted, my voice cracking. The figure moved closer, its form flickering like a broken film reel. "It doesn't matter. You've been chosen." "Chosen for what?" I demanded, but the figure didn't answer. Instead, it pointed behind me with one skeletal hand. I turned slowly, my stomach twisting in dread. It was there, the keeper. The shadowy figure from the void now stood fully formed, towering over the landscape. Its limbs stretched and shifted, melting into the darkness around it. Its eyes, two burning slits of light, locked onto me, radiating malice. The keys in my hand grew hot, searing my skin. The largest one pulsed with light, brighter and brighter until it felt like it might explode. The keeper moved, its form rippling as it closed the distance between us in seconds. My body refused to obey as its clawed hand reached toward me, stopping just inches from my chest. "Choose," it commanded, its voice reverberating in my skull. The doors appeared again, surrounding me in a ring of infinite possibilities. The keeper's claws twitched impatiently, the heat from its form suffocating. With no other option, I gripped the glowing key and shoved it into the nearest door. The lock clicked, and the keeper lunged just as the door burst open, pulling me through. I woke up on the floor of my dorm room, gasping for air. The keys were still in my hand, their weight cold and inert now, like any ordinary objects. For a fleeting moment, I thought it might have been a nightmare, until I looked at my desk. The hidden drawer was gone. In its place was a blackened outline, as if it had been burned away. The hum of the keys was silent now, but the air in the room felt wrong, heavy, watching. I shoved the keyring into my backpack, my fingers trembling. Whatever had happened, I needed answers, but deep down, I knew there wouldn't be any. The first week after, I avoided the abandoned wing of the campus entirely. I skipped classes, stayed in public spaces, and kept my room brightly lit at all hours. I tried to forget, but the shadows wouldn't let me. They crept into my peripheral vision, stretching unnaturally across walls, flickering just outside the range of my sight. The whispers followed, faint and urgent, growing louder each time I ignored them. One night, I finally broke. Grabbing the keys, I marched to the abandoned wing, my heart pounding. I found the door I had unlocked before. The wood was splintered now, the edges scorched like it had been through a fire. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to let us know in the comments which story kept you up at night. Your feedback inspires us to create even more haunting adventures. Hit that like button to support the channel, share this video with your friends who love a good scare, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another eerie encounter. And hey, if you have your own creepy story, drop it in the comments. We might feature it in a future video. Finally, check out the videos popping up on your screen right now for even more spine-tingling content. Trust me, you don't want to miss them. Stay safe and sleep well.